Penguin Random House Canada presents The Expendables, How the Middle Class Got Screwed by Globalization, by Jeff Rubin. To all those left behind. Forward, then and now. You could see the pandemic coming. It wasn't as though there was no warning. The virus emerged in China, but arrived in North America before we were ready, and it landed with the destructive force of a tsunami. Record-setting consumer spending hit a brick wall as shoppers stayed home. New car sales went over a cliff. And following just like clockwork, unemployment went through the roof as shops and factories shut down. An unprecedented bull run on the stock market quickly turned into panic selling, and the Dow cratered, seemingly overnight. The S&P 500 dropped over 20% into bear market territory, and the result was a global recession that seemed to have come out of nowhere. More than 116,000 people died in the United States. Elvis Presley appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show that year. The Frisbee was invented. Ford introduced the Edsel with great fanfare. Canada unveiled the Avro Aero jet fighter. The USSR launched Sputnik. And Dwight D. Eisenhower was sworn in as President of the United States. It was 1957. By the way, the world recovered almost immediately from the Asian flu, as that pandemic was known. After a staggering 10% decline in gross domestic product, GDP, in the first quarter of 1958, by the third quarter, growth had spiked to 10%, a 20 percentage point swing. So, no big deal, right? The economy got the flu, it took some time off, and it went right back to churning out jobs and profits. In fact, when economists and historians talk about the Eisenhower recession, they seldom even mention the Asian flu as a cause. It would seem to follow, then, that we have a model to help us predict what the recovery from COVID-19 will look like. Just look at 1958, and then wait for the jobs and the markets to return to form and the good times to resume. Not quite the catastrophe we feared. But if you're thinking that what was true in 1958 is true today, this book is for you. Because while consumer spending, consistent GDP growth, and a record-breaking bull run on the stock market may make it feel as though we've wandered into the Eisenhower, or Diefenbaker if you live in Canada, era. That is a dangerous illusion, especially if you're a member of the rapidly shrinking middle class. Because consumer spending, GDP growth, and stocks have almost nothing to do with your economic health. In fact, as you will see, those things measure only rich people's economic health. And of late, these folks haven't been getting rich by making more Edsels or engineering more Aeros. Those cars and planes belong to a different world. A world in which factory jobs paid a middle-class wage and products on the shelves came from factories down the road. A world in which local labor was so essential that their jobs were secure. And a world where taxes were so progressive that the rich actually paid their freight. That was a long time ago. Looking backward in politics is usually considered poor form. It's much safer to be considered progressive and look ahead. But the fact is that the late 1950s and early 1960s may have marked the greatest economic equality in history. And that economic health was like immunological health. The economy got better quickly because it was already healthy. But two other things happened in 1957 that give us some sense of why the recovery from the COVID-19 recession might be a lot harder than shaking off the Asian flu. First, the Treaty of Rome was signed in March of that year, establishing the precursor of the European Union, the European Economic Community. Though the tight political and economic integration of a United States of Europe was still just a dream, the Treaty of Rome was an important step in creating a common market. Up until that point, each country had the ability to impose tariffs to protect key industries and the associated jobs. From that moment on, France, West Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg would give up that ability in exchange for the right to sell in each other's markets without facing tariffs. The hope behind lifting tariffs was that in a world of economic expansion, workers and industries wouldn't need protection. There would be so much wealth to go around that everyone would be better off. In other words, it was a form of free trade and a precursor of what was to follow. Free trade was an idea that was sweeping the world. As we will see, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, a treaty designed to increase international trade by removing protections for industry and labor, had been signed into law in 1947 and went through several rounds of updates, each slashing more tariffs. In 1956, the so-called Geneva Round, because it was negotiated in Geneva, eliminated $2.5 billion of protections between 26 countries. So globalization was swirling in the air as the Asian flu was making its way across the Pacific. The Asian flu could have cratered the global economy, but it didn't. By coincidence, there was another near miss that year that most people didn't even notice at the time. In 1986, it was revealed that a United States Air Force B-36 bomber had accidentally dropped a hydrogen bomb on New Mexico in May 1957. It was, it turned out, the most powerful nuclear bomb ever built. At 10 megatons, it was bigger than anything in today's nuclear arsenal, and about 625 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Though the 42,000-pound bomb did not detonate, it left a crater 3.5 meters, 12 feet deep, and more than 7 meters, 25 feet wide. If it had gone off, it would have vaporized the airbase where the bomber was scheduled to land. An investigation revealed that a safety mechanism had been removed. You would think the Air Force would have been a little more careful with warheads by 1957. They'd already jettisoned one bomb off the coast of British Columbia and another in the St. Lawrence River, in addition to crashes of nuclear bombers in the Atlantic and in the mountains of New Mexico. Another 2 nuclear bombs fell out of the sky in 1961 over North Carolina. Removing protections when so much is at stake, even to increase efficiency, can be more than dangerous. It can be apocalyptic. None of those bombs detonated, but the slow fuse burn of GATT and globalization has left an industrial landscape every bit as cratered as the destruction left by a nuclear warhead. If a worker from 1957 could see Detroit today, what would he think? The shuttered factories across North America, the boarded-up main streets, the empty union halls. The physical toll of globalization would be inescapable. Which brings us back to the flu. Early on in the COVID-19 crisis, the scale of the required government response was often compared to that needed during the Second World War. It was time for our ingenuity and industrial might to be put to good use and mobilized, much in the same way it had been a couple of generations ago. The United States built more than 2,700 Liberty-class freighters between 1941 and 1945. That's 2 14,000-ton ships every 3 days, or more than 39 million tons of ship. Surely, the world's biggest economy could make some N95 masks. Well, not really. On March 19, 2020, Taiwan announced it could spare 100,000 masks.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?